These are the stocks that paid me $542 for the month of January. Market is down today. It's actually down more than 1.5%. And in these uncertain times with tariffs and Mr. Trump at the helm, getting dividends every single month, no matter if the stock price is up or down, is a huge motivating factor to keep on investing in the stock market. And in this video, I'll be breaking down each stock that paid me this past month and the future investment philosophy of why I invest in these particular companies. If you're also interested in growing your wealth through the stock market, please smash the like button and the subscribe button. Every week, we pump out videos on this channel that may help you achieve your goal. Before we jump into everything, I wanted to summarize my dividend income for the entire year. Now I get paid $5,084 for the year. $5,000. Absolutely incredible. My yield on cost is 3.7% and the yield is 3.11%, which basically means that my stock holdings have gone up in value. On average, every single month, I get paid $423. And every single day, I get paid $13.93 for doing absolutely nothing. Incredible. The first stock that paid me dividends was Pepsi, ticker symbol PEP or PEP. Pepsi paid me nearly $42 this month. Pepsi is a company that needs no introduction. They make consumer goods specifically in the food and beverage industry. They operate in the United States, in Canada, and pretty much every other international markets where US products are available. Over the last few years, Pepsi revenue has been steadily increasing, although not at the high rate as many other tech companies, but for a consumer defensive stock, Pepsi has seen a nice increase in revenue. Profit margins are also healthy at around 10%. And their international expansion into developing countries, particularly in Asia and in Africa, continue to add on massively to their revenue. The stock price has been beaten down from all-time highs of nearly $190. Right now, it's around $152, which also means the dividend yield is nice and juicy at around 3.5%. The question is, can Pepsi protect this dividend? And I think it can. Its debt ratio is under control, and the payout ratio is also under control at around 80%. Given all these reasons, I will continue to keep on investing in Pepsi, particularly because I think it is at a huge discount right now. And it also paid me $42, hopefully $100 in the coming few years. The next stock that paid me dividends was the S&P 500 through this ETF called VFV. This paid me nearly $122 for the month. An insane amount. The S&P 500 is an index that tracks the 500 biggest companies in the United States of America. It holds companies in all industries: technology, financials, insurance, healthcare, consumer defensive goods. Literally anything that you can think of is included in the S&P 500. In the past few years, the S&P 500 has returned an average of 12% per year, but if you elongate this timeline over the past 40 years, the S&P 500 has returned 10% on average. This is not counting the dividends. The dividend yield is around 1.1% to 0.8%, depending on the price of the ETF. As you can imagine, the majority of the return you'll get is from actually holding the S&P 500 for the long run, 20 or 30 years, but you also get this 1.1% dividend as an incentive for holding on to the stock. I received $122 for holding tech companies that are growing massively. With recent tariff threats and other economic uncertainty, people are shying away from the stock market. I've seen people posting that they're going to liquidate their entire portfolio, but this is actually the time you should be investing. If there's a slight market correction or a potential bear market for the next 8 to 9 months, you want to take advantage of this and invest. Statistically, bull markets last way longer than bear markets, for an average of 4 to 5 years, whereas bear markets only last 9 to 18 months. So maybe you want to take advantage of this, invest in the S&P 500, and also make this $100 just for holding on to growth stocks. I think that's pretty amazing. The next stock that paid me dividends was HYLD. This is a covered call ETF tracking the S&P 500 that paid me nearly $98 for the month of January. We know what the S&P 500 is, but what are covered call ETFs? Covered calls are extremely controversial online. People really fight each other a lot, defending one side or the other, but I like to invest in covered calls for the income. You'll notice that I don't invest a large percentage of my portfolio in covered call ETFs, less than 15% total, but I do like the motivating factor of seeing income pile up in my account every single week. Comparing this ETF that tracks the S&P 500, HYLD, the yield is around 12%. The normal yield for the S&P 500 is 1%. You can see why the income potential is much higher. The downside is that they sacrifice long-term potential growth. Call options that are written right at the stock price or near to it means that you're sacrificing long-term potential growth for getting that income now. Although a lot of ETFs don't write call options on the entirety of the portfolio, which means that you don't sacrifice all long-term potential growth. For example, HYLD writes call options on 50% of the portfolio. That means that 50% of the portfolio still is available to partake in that growth. You'll notice that this is actually up around 9 to 10% over the last year, not taking into account dividends. So the total return is around 22%, which is incredible for a covered call ETF. My strategy is going to be keep on adding to this and keep on participating in that 12% yield. as long as I also invest in the actual S&P 500 index, because that is where the real growth is. The next stock that paid me dividend was QQCL. This is a covered call ETF tracking the NASDAQ 100. QQCL paid me nearly $28 this month. The NASDAQ 100, much like the S&P 500, is an index that tracks 100 of the biggest companies in the United States of America. The NASDAQ 100 just so happens to be very tech focused. This is because the biggest companies are tech companies. If you look at Apple, if you look at Microsoft, Google, Nvidia, literally all the biggest companies in the world are tech companies. So if you don't like tech, if you think tech is not going to add value in the future, you might want to stay away from this ETF. But for me, I think tech is going to keep on pounding and delivering value for decades to come. If you look at your life, any big product that you own, any big service that you use has technological elements, and this is just the beginning. As developing economies partake in this technological wave, we're just going to see massive stock valuations. QQCL is an ETF that writes covered calls on the NASDAQ 100, and it also adds leverage onto it. What is leverage? Leverage is a very interesting instrument that adds onto your returns but does come with some risks. Let's say that the NASDAQ 100 goes up 10%. This ETF, QQCL, has 25% added onto that, which basically means that it's going to go up by 12.5%. The opposite is also true though. If the index goes down 10%, this ETF is going to go down 12.5% plus leverage costs, or the cost of interest that the ETF provider has to pay. You can see the pros and cons here, but the key point to note is that the long-term average of the NASDAQ 100, the S&P 500, and other US stock indices is positive probabilistically. So adding some modest leverage can massively add on to your returns, compounded through decades. That's why I choose to invest in QQCL and will keep on doing so as long as I can also invest in the actual NASDAQ 100 index. The next stock that paid me dividends was HEQL. This is a Global X product that is an all equity leverage ETF. This paid me nearly $7 for the month of January. Leverage we've covered before, it is just a way of adding on to the returns, but what does all equity mean? All equity basically means that this ETF holds not just US and Canadian holdings, it also holds international markets. Something you might have noticed with my portfolio, and rightfully so, is that I invest in the US quite a lot because I love the American economy. But I also want to partake in the international economy just in case that international markets recover and catch up to the US in the coming decade. This is my way of doing that. Not a lot of money invested, but enough to keep that dividend snowball growing and the return rate also decently tied to the international market. Although I firmly believe that the US market is going to be the catalyst for most growth in the coming decade since it has the biggest companies, I do think international markets, particularly developing countries like Vietnam, the Middle East, even Africa, have exciting opportunities because they have labor and they have young people entering the workforce and the middle class expanding. If you look at India, the middle class has quadrupled in the last 30 years, which is an exciting opportunity when it comes to stock market investing. Indices like the Nifty 50, which include 50 of the biggest companies in India, have returned good and have also beaten the S&P 500 in several years. So there's pros and cons of investing in international markets, but I also utilize this ETF because it has leverage. Let's say that international markets underperform the US, adding leverage onto this makes up for the return. My goal is to keep on investing in this and drive this dollar amount to $10 every single month as an immediate goal, and maybe $100 a month 10 years from now. That's a long time, but that is the thing with stock market investing. You have to stay consistent. My next pair was VDY. This is a Vanguard product that tracks the TSX 60, particularly the FTSE High Dividend Pairs Index. VDY paid me nearly $90 for the month of January, and this is also one of my monthly pairs, which is exciting that a monthly pair is reaching that all-promising, all-encompassing $100 a month milestone. VDY is an ETF that holds Canadian companies in the financial industry, the insurance industry, the healthcare industry, the telecom industry, all of the oligopolies that we love and adore in Canada. Historically, this ETF has underperformed the US market, but has a nice return at around 15% for the last year, not taking into account the dividend yield. The dividend yield sits at around 4.2 to 4.5%, depending on the price of the stock. Why I like VDY is that it's very diverse. It holds a lot of the big companies that everybody uses in Canada. Everybody needs a bank, everybody needs energy, everybody needs a telecom provider. So I just don't think these companies are going to go away anytime soon. The returns are decent at 15% for the year, and that 4.2 to 4.5% dividend yield just means that I'm going to keep on pouring money into VDY. Most of my money is still going to be invested in the US since that is the growth focused portion of my portfolio. But VDY gives me a nice opportunity to partake in the Canadian market, support Canadian companies and the Canadian industry, and at the same time also pay myself every single month. The next stock that paid me dividend was the Bank of Nova Scotia, ticker symbol BNS. The Bank of Nova Scotia is one of the 5 biggest banks in Canada and paid me nearly $65 for the month of January. It's seen its profit margins recover instance, the Bank of Canada has cut interest rates to now 3% with further rate cuts anticipated because of tariffs and other economic policies. Revenues have also recovered, being up consistently, and it's seen its loan loss provisions also decrease since people are now able to afford more loans. Everybody loves debt. I love debt. One of their strategies that I really like is expansion into Latin America and also Central America. As the middle class expands in developing countries, they will become more digitalized and they will want to bank at bigger banks like the Bank of Nova Scotia and other international banking institutions. I think the strategy is going to pay off. It's paid off for other Canadian companies like Manulife Financial that has expanded into Asia. And the bonus is that their dividend yield is at around 5.5 to 6%, once again depending on the price of the stock. As interest rates lower, people will get more debt, the economy will boom, hopefully, and that is why I choose to invest in BNS. The next stock that paid me dividends was HDIV. This is a Hamilton ETF's product that is a covered call ETF tracking the TSX 60 pretty much. HDIV paid me roughly $70 for the month of January. I already talked about HYLD, the Hamilton product tracking the S&P 500. This product is the same but now tracking the TSX 60. It includes all major indices like financials, healthcare, all the big Canadian oligopolies, and writes a covered call strategy on top of that. The yield is nice and juicy at around 11%. Why I also like HDIV is because it also includes US financials. US financials saw a big hit because of a couple of banks failing, nothing too big, and they've seen a nice recovery as interest rates also come down in the United States. I think US financials along with Canadian financials and staple companies are a good strategy for writing covered calls, specifically because they're stable industries and the covered call strategy just adds on to the income that they already have. My goal with HDIV is to keep on adding on to the stock and raise this monthly amount from 70 to 80, 90, and potentially even $100 without sacrificing the other growth of my portfolio. Essentially, if I summarize my strategy, I buy three major indices, which is the S&P 500, the NASDAQ 100, and the TSX 60. HDIV, HYLD, and QQCL is my way of writing covered calls on my portfolio while utilizing smart people at these ETF providers. I'm not smart, I don't want to manually write covered calls, so I just partake in these covered call ETFs. The last stock that paid me dividends was CIBC, the Canadian Imperial Bank for Commerce. This is one of the 5 big banks in Canada and has done extremely well in the last few years. I'm actually up more than 50% on my holding itself, not taking into account the dividends. A big part of their strategy is targeting newcomers to Canada by making it extremely easy to sign up for CIBC accounts and get loans and credit card products at their banking institutions. Because of this, they've seen a nice increase in revenue since Canadian immigration has gone up in the last few years and does continue to be a focal point in maintaining population in Canada, making for a solid holding, not taking into account that 5% dividend yield that they already come with. The price appreciation is good, the 5% dividend yield is good, and I'll keep on adding on to CIBC, hopefully driving this number up to $20. That's it, those were the stocks that paid me dividends for the month of January. What paid you? Are you going to stick to this dividend strategy going into 2025? Are you going to pull all of your money from the stock market? What are you going to do with your investments? I'm always interested and always ready to learn. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash the like button and the subscribe button. Every subscriber matters and helps get this video to the right people, also interested in investing, saving, and just improving their relationship with money. I'll see you in the next one.